As if British Prime Minister David Cameron didn't have enough to do tackling recession and spending cuts, now he's having to watch his back. London Mayor Boris Johnson's capturing the public and his party's minds, even overshadowing his beleaguered leader at the Conservatives conference. Live now to RT's Laura Smith in Birmingham. Laura, it's not so long ago that Boris was considered a bit of a bumbling political joke. What's changed, and should David Cameron be worried?
I think it's really the Olympics that has changed all that. Such a success, as we know. And Boris was such a hit on Tuesday. He's still got this great blonde mop of hair, which he referred to, that David Cameron has made a joke of. He said if he was a mop, then David Cameron was the broom sweeping out the economy. And some have said, in fact, that Cameron was very generous to agree to make the closing speech at Boris's annual conference. And of course, one of the things that people are looking for now from David Cameron is this star quality, but Dave is not Boris, and his speech couldn't have really been in sharper contrast to Boris's. I watched the speech from the BBC studio here in Birmingham, but people who were queuing up outside to get into it said that they'd never seen such short queues to get into a leader's speech at a conference, which is quite telling. He didn't bounce onto the stage. There were absolutely no jokes in his speech, again in sharp contrast to Boris's. It looked a little bit like nerves, but I think probably what he was going for was this gravitas. And of course, he had much more serious things to talk about than Boris did, and he launched into these grave topics from the very beginning. It's a tradition, really, to make a couple of jokes at the beginning, lighten the atmosphere, but there was none of that from David Cameron. One of the other things that people were looking for was, does he have a growth strategy as well as a cut strategy? He still says that cuts are at the heart of his growth policy, which is cutting the deficit. He talked about growth, but he didn't really give an exact plan, which is what a lot of people were looking for. He defended the economic strategy, but of course we all know the arguments, and what's really lacking is any real evidence that it's actually working. Two Conservatives have already criticised the government's strategy, saying that what the government's doing basically is hoping that something will turn up, but not doing enough to kickstart growth themselves, and there was nothing really in the speech to contradict that. Something else I noticed was that he didn't say the word austerity once, and that's something I've seen whilst hanging around on the fringes of this conference over the last couple of days. Conservatives don't like the word austerity anymore. They use these euphemisms. They say tough decisions, they say reducing the deficit, they say reducing the government's share of spending. It's not fashionable to say the word austerity, very uncomfortable with it. So strategy not hugely coherent, which is very important if Cameron wants to regain this reputation that he's had in the past for huge competence. Also, did he address fears that the vulnerable will suffer most from the cuts and the economic strategy that he's proposing? He tried, but he's really the only one at this conference who did. He delivered a classic Conservative message. He said smaller government, talked about aspiration, a lot about hard work, but that's come against a backdrop of an announcement of a £10 billion cut in the welfare budget, which will affect primarily the young and the poor. No talk of older people, and we know in this country older people, whatever their incomes are otherwise, they all get a state pension, they all get free travel, they all get a winter fuel allowance. That's not being addressed at all. Something he did mention, which I have to say I wasn't really expecting, was Scotland, of course. We've had news recently that the stalemate's been broken between London and Edinburgh on Edinburgh holding a referendum on its participation in the UK. David Cameron will meet with Premier Alex Salmond on Monday to hash out the details, but what we're hearing is that there will be a referendum held in autumn 2014, a simple yes-no question as to whether Scotland will remain part of the UK. And of course, the major thing that David Cameron does not want is to be the man who's in charge over the breakup of the UK.
All right, RT's Laura Smith in Birmingham.